Hello, I'm Dr. Gregory Seltz. Welcome to our Liberty Alert Live. I think we had another glitch in our cameras. We've been working on this stuff and working on this stuff. Um, but again, it's great to be here with you. And today, we're kind of in, again, a very strange time. We're going to talk about election reflections, but I also want to talk about a Supreme Court case that was just argued this last week. It's going to take a while for them to actually come up with the ruling, but it is going to be a huge ruling for the sake of religious liberty and the church. And that really is been the big issue. We've talked about this over and over and over again. For a Christian, the biggest issue on the ballot this time was religious liberty. And somehow the culture made it about a nice guy versus a mean guy and all these different kind of things. And we always kept saying, no, platforms, not people, platforms, not people. And religious liberty is on it was on the ballot, and there's already some things in the works that if the count goes one way or the other are coming. And one of them just I thought it sounded almost like the USSR, these reconciliation commissions. And I was like, what is that? But anyway, so we'll get to that. So the election is still in question. What's the main ballot on the issue and why? What is this Fulton versus Philadelphia, and why is that also part of the same concern that we've had? And again, what is this thing about platforms, policies, not persons? And what are some of the questions? We're going to, at the very end with some very practical advice going forward that I think will help you in the years to come. So again, thanks again. Please keep sharing our Liberty Alerts, and back here in Washington, D.C., and appreciate all the work that you're doing for us as you share with other people. And also, if you wouldn't mind, like I said, again, let people know about our Liberty Alert, but also our webpage, because there's all these resources are there for you. And if you're moved to give, please, you can do that online as well. And we exist only by the gifts of God's people as they tell us, stay there in D.C. and fight for our freedom so we can preach the gospel. All right, D.C.'s quiet a little bit right now. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know if that's quiet before a storm, but my flag is out, okay? I put my flag out. Now, those of you who know what that's about, I took it in because when I was traveling, and kudos to all you in Dallas, it was a great weekend. I really enjoyed being with you. But my flag's back out. But I did notice that my next door neighbor, who I don't think I've ever seen his flag in, he pulled his in. And again, that was because there were the protesters, and some of them were stealing flags, others were lighting them up. And of course, I wasn't here at a couple days last week, and I just didn't want to come back and find the building on fire. But that kind of stuff really was unnerving, and I don't think we should put up with stuff like that. You don't have the right to desecrate. You don't have the right to destroy. You have the right to protest, and we have the right to engage with these kind of things. But so anyway, things are a little bit more quiet. And again, what we've always said is that good government can't save us. It can provide civility and opportunity. We think that's important, but bad government can destroy. And so I'm going to put up on our website a document called Two Kingdom Principles for Public Engagement and Public Policy Dialogue. And there's 8 principles on here. I won't go through all of them right now, but the fifth one, okay, this is where it gets kind of real practical. A healthy society should honor the uniqueness of the family and the distinct purpose of the church in its polity and public manifestation, while recognizing the limited sphere of the government in order for religious liberty and life to survive and thrive. That's a key thing. And when government starts taking over the role of family or starts getting into the business of the church, and that encroachment is kind of what we're facing in this moment in time. That's bad policy, and it's going to be bad policy not just for Christians. It's going to be bad policy for liberty in general. Christian engagement in the political realm asserts that religious liberty and the sanctity of life are universal human values. Christian engagement in the public realm advocates for 3 enduring structures that are beneficial to society: the church, the family, and the government. But the church and the family were before government. Government is God's temporary agency because people just get really, really bad and won't stop. And so the government's job is to maintain law and order and things of that nature so that institutions like the church, the family, and free society and virtuous people can thrive. And then Christian government in the political realm, the government has a vital but secondary or penultimate purpose. And we've talked a lot about that. And again, just understanding. So those who believe that government's going to save us, it's not just that point of view is different than ours. It's going to be destructive to individual liberty. And we can demonstrate that historically, sociologically, and of course, theologically too. So that's a document we'll put up, and I hope that's a blessing to you. Put that to work. All right, where are we? Some good news. There's a vaccine on the way. Again, all this stuff before the election, it's never going to happen, never going to. Here we are. The stock market jumped on that because it was like, wow. And so I guess by spring they're thinking that will happen. And again, remember, it was never about eradicating the disease. That was never the thing. It was just making sure that our hospitals were not overrun and that those who were truly vulnerable were protected. Well, there's ways you can do that without shutting everything down. And again, the platforms, you start seeing, well, who was building on that platform of managing risk but opening up and also taking things seriously and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to get into it. We've been talking that to death, but there's politics more than science going on. I think I just saw Aaron Rodgers talk about this. He said, we've got these protocols, we've got to have masks on. He said, we're out there bashing into each other and sweat's flying and spittles flying and all this kind of stuff, but at the end of the game, we can't go shake hands or something. He said it's crazy, and I think there's a certain amount of that, And then again, these are some of the healthiest people alive, so if they do get it, and it's an outbreak, as long as no one gets really sick, then it develops the herd immunity that we've been talking about. So, with the vaccine, with the therapeutics, and with developing herd immunity, that's how the virus weakens and eventually fades away. It's a virus. That's what's going to happen. And destroying the culture for the sake of. And so again, at the end, we're going to have some questions you should ask when you're talking about public policy. We'll talk about that, and one of them is compared to what. The second question is at what cost, and so these are the kind of things we'll talk about at the end that will give you practical ways of dealing with a lot of these difficult issues. There's no easy answer. Sometimes it's the lesser of two evils and things like that. All right, back to the election. Where we are where we were in the first debate when both candidates were asked, when will you declare victory? And both of them said, when the audited legal votes are counted. And they haven't been counted yet. The audited legal votes have not all been counted. And so again, some of the shenanigans when 80 million votes are just mailed out, I think that's the number I just read, just mailed out. I remember, to me, voting was this. You got your license, you had to make sure you registered. You got your license, then you went and you proved who you were, and you signed it, and then you went, got your ballot, and then you went. And then it was just between you and, no one else could even know what you did. And if you couldn't be there on the day of, then you had to go get a notarized, you had to show your license to somebody, they had to notarize it, and that meant that if they lied, they could suffer from perjury, they could be brought up on charges. And then you got one ballot mailed to you, and you made sure you mailed it in time so it got there in time. Well, we blew that whole thing out of the water, again, because of supposedly this COVID pandemic. And here we are. And so some of the stuff that we're seeing, it's just crazy. I don't know. Part of me is just, look, we want this to be a fair election. We want it to, whoever wins, we want it to be a fair election. We want to be able to trust the process. And all I know is on election night, I was, one of the first things that got me, I was like, why aren't they calling Florida? And if that's a done deal. And then they called Arizona within the first hour, and I think now it's down to like 10,000 votes separate them. But they called it in the first hour. And like somebody said, they said when you do these kind of things, and you don't trust the polls, and you can't trust this, and you can't trust that, it changes how people respond. Sometimes people don't go vote because of that. They don't give money because of that. They're more apt to stay home or leave the line, and all those things happen when information comes out. And so the information should be, to the best of our ability, correct, or it shouldn't overstate what we do not know. And more you're starting to say, well, why didn't they call Florida almost instantaneously, because it was a huge lead, but they called Arizona and blah, blah, blah. And then 80 million paper ballots just sent out. And here's the one that got me this week. 450,000 votes came in that only had one thing checked on them, the presidency. And it was for one candidate. It was never like 60% for him and 40% for him, or 8. It was 100% for one candidate. Come on, sanctified common sense says this just doesn't seem right. Listen, our view of the vote, and again, our view of the vote is that the government's to be the referees, and they're supposed to make sure we play the game fairly. That's their role. And when you start to ask the question whether they're impinging on that role, or whether they're actually saying you play by these rules and you play by those rules, and right now they're even talking about in Pennsylvania that they did certain things with certain ballots and they didn't do the same thing with the other ballots. Well, why didn't they do that? I think they made like phone calls. Like if the ballot didn't look like it was properly filled out, they made phone calls to actually people who filled those out to try to make sure that they got them correct, but they didn't do it for the ballot from the other person. And again, you start saying, well, why is that? No, just treat them all the same. That's all we're saying. Treat them all the same. When we used to play in basketball, I remember when we played against our arch rivals and on their home court, and the referees just started calling just ridiculous things. We used to call that being homered. All we wanted was, call the game straight, man. If you're going to call it that way for them or for us, call it that way for them. Well, you usually didn't get that on somebody's home court. We kind of knew that. But you did expect that when you got into the state championships, that stuff was thrown out. Now it's neutral court, neutral refs. Well, we're on a national scale talking about something as precious as our liberties and our vote. We've got to be assured of this process. The other thing that I was thinking about on this, and I'm sorry, just going off the cuff on this. Why do we accept certain things? One guy came out from Pennsylvania, I think he was the Attorney General, and he said, we're going to find fraud. We're going to find it. It happens. And I went, okay. So he just admits it. How much then? Because if it's a lot, then is that good or is that bad? Or, is there some kind of like percentage built into the system? But what if this is completely different than it's ever been? Shouldn't we know that? Okay. So it bothered me that he just admitted up front, yeah, we're going to find it. So it's almost like, yeah, don't worry, we're going to find it. Well, no, then that question is, then how much are we going to find? And is it being even abused more than ever? And why should we settle for that anyway? I mean, with all our technology and our ability to show who we are, and I mean, they got so much information, you can't even walk into a government building. They already know who you are pretty much. Facial recognition, whether you've been there before, but we can't know who's voting for the President of the United States. Why do we accept such things? Why do we just say, we wouldn't. I mean, if your guy doesn't win, you wouldn't accept that. That's all I can tell you. So I'm not even saying who your guy is, but if your guy doesn't win, you wouldn't accept it. You want it to have been a fair election. I remember saying this. I said something like this to my wife. We were talking about some other issues, some social issues, and I said, like Denzel Washington, he's one of my favorite actors. I think if there were Hollywood royalty today, and there isn't, he would be right up there, though. Just a class act in so many ways, and phenomenal actor too. But it always bugged me that they gave him the Academy Award. And again, I don't know how many he's got. He may have more than I know, but I think the first one was for Training Day. And my point was there was so much caricaturing in Training Day about black, white, police, all this kind of stuff. And there was one scene in Training Day where Denzel goes, he's a rogue cop, and he goes into this lady's house and to steal money. And when she comes running out, she says, "Blast them fools! They're not police, they're not cops." And immediately, 15 guys, some had shirts on, some didn't have shirts. Immediately they open up. They got 9mm, they got 45s, they got Mac 10s, and they immediately open up on this. And I thought, now does that happen in your neighborhood? And we just watch it like, oh yeah, that happens all the time. And I said, I don't think that happens all the time. And if it does, then that's something we got to talk about. But it's almost like we watch it. And so we watch these shows like, The Boss, and by the way, just the subtle pornographic stuff that comes in, but then The Boss and The Wire and all that kind of stuff. And it just shows how politics is so dirty in the city and how there's cheating going on and votes are being bought. And we watch it and go, yeah, that happens. Like, why? And voter intimidation and harvesting from poor people, saying you're going to sign this and give it to me and I'll take it in. I mean, that's all part of our entertainment. And yet we just assume, yeah, that happens. Well, I don't think it should. And it definitely should. If that is true, then we got to get to the bottom of this, because, we can't have data dumps and vote dumps and stuff like that. That's just not the way of a democracy that can survive. Now, it's really interesting. I remember reading this. LBJ, in his autobiography, he cheated. This is fundamentally true. In his first election to the Senate, he literally stole the election. He stuffed the ballot boxes on the border, and it was against Coke Stevenson, who was a Texas figure. He was a ranger. I mean, just an upstanding guy. And there was the picture of Coke Stevenson going into those border towns and getting those boxes. And there were pistoleros pointed at him, and he went in with guns and holstered, but rode into town to get things. And LBJ was able to seal those votes, in the containers, and they were never opened. And they said if those votes would have ever been opened, they would have been thrown out, and he would have lost. He would have never been a senator. He would have never been the vice president, and he would have never been president of the United States. And he was known as Landslide Lyndon, because he always made sure he knew how many votes he needed to have. And that should trouble us. I mean, he was proud of it, by the way. He took pictures of that. He was proud that he kind of jimmied the system. It's in his own autobiography. But again, when we look at that kind of stuff in the age that we have, with the technology that we have, with the private VPNs that we have, we should be able to root a lot of that out. And it seems like we're going in the opposite direction. That's not a good thing. So if you're a Christian, you don't want illegality, you don't want intimidation or coercion to rule the day. So the next time you hear about license, show who you are, show that you live there. And if you aren't going to be able to vote in person, then get a notarized, ballot, so that we know that it's exactly you who's sending it, and then make sure that you place it. I guess there's some talk of being able to place it, in depositories, because some people don't even trust that the post office is going to deliver it. Yikes! I hope we're not going there. But anyway, again, that's the Christian mindset is we want this to be fair and above board, and that's what the role of government ultimately should be. So hang in there. Thoughts and prayers. But again, this took, 37, 38 days with Bush Gore, and there have been other crazy things like this before, like we've talked about. And I think we're at a point now where we can say, hey, this system that we just did months, when people voted 4 weeks before the election, that didn't make any sense to me. But again, let's just make sure it's fair and all the legal votes are counted. Now, the second thing that I saw in our cultural preview, this one, again, it's disturbing because it's kind of what we've been talking about. And we just need to be aware of this, because this is going to have ramifications to our ability to be the church, to be Christians, to find, if someone finds out you're a Christian in certain circles today, you can not only be ostracized, you can lose your job. In certain parts of our culture, it's punitive what can happen if they find out you actually go to church. And so when Robert Reich came out, and I've read you stuff about Robert Reich where he literally thinks the church is the problem in society today. It's more problematic than terrorism, the traditional Bible-believing church. He came out and he's talking, and this just is an article I just saw, about Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that he thinks if Biden winds up winning, he thinks he should establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So now, if you happen to have a differing point of view, we can put you through this process, and you'll all come out saying, "I believe the same thing." Where have we ever been? Why don't people say that's crazy? That's crazy. It sounds like USSR, Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's interesting. I just came up. There's a book that I just ran into called "Live Not by Lies." By Rod Dreher, and he wrote the Benedictine option. But this is an interesting book. I'm not going to get to the particulars, but on the back, here's what it says. This is a remarkable book. It's reminding us of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's timeless appeal to live not by lies. His suggestion is that we're at the dawning of a post-Christian, okay, a post-Christian, pre-totalitarian society, and it's impossible to dismiss that in light of what this case he builds. And then he talks about the invaluable compendium on how to live fearlessly under totalitarianism. But what's interesting is the premise of this book is that it's not as easy to discover who's the one lying to you, because the very people that might be saying don't live by lies are the ones that may be telling you the lies. And we've talked about how the secular Puritans today, they'll call themselves the anti-fascists, but then they do very fascist things. So again, you have to ask, what are they doing? Not just what are they saying, because they might be saying the right things, but using them to actually do the exact opposite of those things. And he said that's why he said Christians have been kind of lulled to sleep in America, because a lot of the people he interviews are people from communist countries who say they look and see what's happening in America, and they're shocked, because they see us giving away our freedoms in droves. And they say, once you give them away, the government never gives them back to you. And then of course what happens when you don't have freedom, and you start to try to exercise your freedoms, then you'll find out what totalitarianism is, even when it's done benevolently for you. So good book there. But when I saw Reich say that, that's how totalitarians talk. They're the ones who set up truth and reconciliation commissions. The rest of us just talk to each other, and we try to dialogue with each other. We try to shake hands with each other after we're done. We try to understand different points of view. We try to, if we disagree, we try to figure out why we disagree, and we try to honorably, with civility, try to honor those distinctions, and then we try to persuade one another if we don't always agree. We don't set up commissions. And what bothers me is he's like saying, well, you don't know why you voted. I know exactly why I voted, and I hope that you knew exactly why you voted. I voted for less government, more personal liberty, responsibility. I voted because I believe work has purpose. I believe that there's possibility for change, but I believe that change is supposed to come not from government down, but from people up. And I believe in all of these different things, and so I look for religious liberty and right of conscience on the platform. I look for pro-life, pro-family, pro-neighborhood, pro-small business. I look for pro-educational choice. I look for all those things, and I believe that charity doesn't come when you give your tax money to a government who then gives it to whoever wants or coerces it from you if you don't give. It comes from free people giving freely to those in need through organizations that can be held accountable if they misuse my gifts. I know exactly why I voted. I don't need a truth and reconciliation commission to teach me otherwise. But wow. And let me just say, with religious liberty, if religious liberty is the key, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute, then that's the point. What we're saying is, if we do disagree, I'm not going to use the force of government to conform you to my way of thinking. And there's one side that's saying, oh yes, we will. And truth and reconciliation commissions sound a lot like that. So, when we keep hearing now, let's be nice now, let's all come together, then stop saying, the kind of things you're saying about people like me who voted maybe differently than you thought I should have. And the last thing, right now, if Joe Biden, if he becomes president, if he would renounce the Equality Act, okay, then maybe there's some opportunity for us to come together. But the Equality Act, which is the Discriminate Against Traditional Christianity Act and Punish Them into Oblivion Act, if that is your idea of let's come together, then you and I are talking about different kind of reconciliation. So yeah, I don't, let's get together and let's understand that some things are I just saw too, there's Massachusetts has an abortion law on the books. I don't know if it passed. I got to go back and recheck that. I just saw it. But it is right up to the moment of birth. You can abort the child, and if the child is born alive and it was supposed to be aborted, it can be killed in the operating room. Folks, we can't be that kind of people. We just can't. And so if you can dial that back a little bit, maybe we can talk. But if you're at that point where you're willing to kill a child who's crying for its life outside of the womb of a mother, we are on radically different paths. I don't believe that. I mean, like I said, I think there are 20 million pro-life Democrats. I don't think we're like that as a people. But we're not going to be browbeaten into that either. So again, what is this thing about from Robert Reich? He said some incredible things, and he's got a voice in the secular Puritan platform, and he's one of the older voices from the Clinton administration, but he's teaching your kids at Berkeley, and there's a whole lot of people who are doing or think what he said is correct. We've got to rise up to that, because if you can't push back on some of these kind of things, then our freedoms maybe they're already gone. Now then we'd have to learn how to live a different way under this regime, but I thought we weren't voting for that. I thought we were just voting for a nice guy who'll bring us together and a mean guy who was fascist. So anyway, why worry about all these things? Again, for us, what we were saying is we can agree to disagree on some things, although there's some things we will prophetically say it's not good that our society is libertine. It's not good that we don't honor marriage. It's not good that we divorce and let our kids just, hang in the wind. It's not good. These things are not good, but we're not going to litigate against those who disagree with us. We're going to try to build freely a moral culture that honors those things. But where we are today is there's one platform that says you will not do that. If you believe in these traditional, moral, biblical things, you cannot survive. You cannot be a public entity in America. So when I ask people, I say, what was the most important thing on the election ballot this last go-round? And most people did not say the Equality Act. They did not say religious liberty. They said all kinds of other things. And it's not that they weren't important. It's just if you're a church and you're a believer, the number one thing that you cannot live, well, we can live anywhere, even in totalitarian regimes. So I don't want to, the Word of God will endure forever. I don't want to give any impression that that's not what but I'm saying if you have liberty to preach the good news of the gospel and they want to take that away from you, that is the most important thing to us. Because everything, all our vocations are in service to finally not only receiving the good news of the gospel, but sharing it. And so when religious liberty was on the ballot, there's no way that if you're a Christian and you voted against your own freedom to preach the gospel, I don't understand your reasoning. I don't. And one side is going to take it away. They've already talked about restructuring and whatever that means. But all I know is the Equality Act is already an act that we've looked at, we've talked about it, and it basically says if you believe in traditional marriage and you believe that God created people male and female, and all this talk about gender identity is something different, but it's not equivalent to biological sex. If you believe that, and you actually teach that, and someone's offended by that, you will be sued. The Virginia Values Act is already doing it in the state level at $100,000 per incident and unlimited damages. And I don't know of any school, preschool, or church ministry that can survive that kind of punitive damage, especially when the state could be the one litigating against you. And if you don't believe that's coming, that's what the Equality Act will do on a federal level if the election were to suddenly be, all in one party who believes that. If the Democratic Party platform of the Equality Act is voted in both the House, the Senate, it will be signed into law by the president if it's Biden, and you will be experiencing what we had hoped you would never have to. Now, again, people say, well, how did this happen? And surely this can't be what's going on in our country. Well, that's where I go to the Supreme Court. It had a case that came before it this week called the Fulton versus Philly case. Philadelphia literally brought a case against the Catholic Social Services of Philadelphia and is going to destroy their foster care program. Why? Not because they're not great. They're one of the best organizations. They actually were doing this kind of stuff long before the state was doing a decent job on it. They have participated in the blessing of the community. They have helped hundreds and thousands of kids in foster homes. They have created stability where there was chaos. They've done all this well. So why is the city of Philadelphia trying to put them out of business? Simple answer. They believe in traditional marriage. Now, the next question is, well, so what? I thought that the Obergefell ruling was just a narrow thing to make sure certain people were honored, but it didn't dishonor other people. Well, no, because the Philadelphia the Philadelphia board said, no, this is going to make homosexual couples, same-sex couples, feel bad. Now, there's been it's not like any couple came and said we want to adopt, and so there's been no case, no incidents, and there's plenty of places where same-sex couples can go to adopt, so and be part of the foster care program. None of that is even happening, but the city decided they were going to put the Catholic services out of business anyway. How do you explain that? How do you answer that? So again, for no other reason than just they think it's not fair. They're going to dump thousands of kids back into the system. They're going to eliminate hundreds of homes and thousands of homes that have cared for these kids. And those things are just going to be lost. I've got all kinds of articles. There's one in the Washington Post. Philadelphia's closing of a Catholic ministry will put kids at risk. Absolutely true. They don't care. It's about fairness. I love one time when someone was asked about an issue about raising taxes, lowering taxes, or whatever. And they said, well, we'll have to raise taxes, because the rich are getting away with everything and the poor are, losing, blah, blah, blah. We've got to raise taxes. And someone finally asked this politician, but if you lower taxes, you actually produce more revenue to the government, which means there's more money for the programs for the people that you say are at risk. So isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? Making sure that there's more revenue for these programs and making sure that the people who created the revenue have the freedom to grow their businesses to increase more revenue? Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? And they jumped in, what? You're actually calling me out on this? They said, well, there's other things that we need to be concerned about. Fairness. Well, it's the same thing here. We have children who are now actually going to be at risk, and there's no secular governmental agency coming in to take over where the Catholic services will have to abdicate. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter that those kids are at risk. So and this is in the Washington Post. So that's an op-ed worth reading. The Supreme Court review of Sharon L. Fulton, the city of Philadelphia, National Review, talks again about this and how there was absolutely no case. No one was mistreated whatsoever. In fact, they have a stellar record, and they've never discriminated. They just say their agency places people according to their beliefs that the best thing for a child is a mother and a father. And that they believe in the institution of marriage as taught in Scripture. There's plenty of other agencies where you can go that will cater to pretty much everything else. Not good enough. Again, the Heritage Foundation has one. And then the Wall Street Journal talks about the Supreme Court voices skepticism of Philadelphia Non-Discrimination Ordinance. And again, it's just that they decided that they were going to enforce this. That's it. And I thought there were protections. I thought the Obergefell ruling was very limited. And again, like I said before, there's no such thing as limited when you give government a bite of your freedom. They will take it all, and then they'll tell you exactly how to live. Now, the Bethany Christian Services, which also were in this lawsuit, they wound up changing their teaching. So again, what was on the ballot this last election? There's one group that says you will conform, you will change what you teach in your Bible classes. You will change what you teach in your pulpits. And of course, you will definitely change what you teach in your schools and in your preschools. And some people voted and said, hey, that's good. And we said, no, that's bad. Now, again, that doesn't mean that the votes that we cast, well, they may not fight for what they said they were going to fight for, but at least they said they were going to try to fight for it. So in closing, here's some helpful ideas. How do you, again, make sense of some of this? First of all, critically think. Make sure that the votes that we're casting reflect God's 10 commandments and ordering of the world and what the government's supposed to do. That's why we differentiate government from what the church. We ask, what would the Father have us do to preserve? That's a policy kind of way of thinking. What would Jesus do? That's about evangelism and sharing the gospel. They're two different things. And Jesus, of course, would tell you to do what the Father says. So honor your father and your mother, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, those things. He would say, I didn't say you don't do those things. I just know that I came to fulfill them because you can't fulfill them fully. But you should still try to virtuously live that way. So good policy cannot defy God's ordering of the world. And if people wish to live such ways, okay, fine, but they should not be able to use the government then to compel others to conform to their way of living. Use your sanctified common sense, your biblically informed common sense. You know, I'll give you an example of what I mean. You know, someone asked me, well, if someone says on their platform they're going to do something, then I look at what they say they're going to do. I don't look at whether they're a nice guy doing it or a mean guy doing it. I look at what they say they're going to do. And then I ask myself, is that something I can vote for or not? Even with the Republicans, my sanctified common sense, people say all the time, why do Republicans, when they go to D.C., suddenly they get there and they change a lot, where Democrats don't? It's really not that hard if you think about it. Because very often the Republican platform is go to Washington and give me back my liberty. Now, go to Washington and give your power back to me. Most politicians, once they get to Washington, realize they need power, and power is something that they start, well, I got to have power to do what I said. So it makes total sense where when you vote for someone to go and to give you back your liberty so you can live free lives, it's very easy to see why some start hedging their bets once they get here, because they want to stick around. When the other side says, we're going to D.C. to take over most of your life. I've never understood why people want to vote for that. Why do you want these folks to have all your information? Why do you want them to control virtually every aspect of your life? Why would you want that when freedom is the one thing that's so precious here, and liberty is the one thing that's so precious here? Again, I don't know why folks would... there's all kinds of issues who could get in there. So, and the second thing is use your sanctified, biblically informed common sense. But here's the big one today. Here's the big one to end on. Because we live in a sinful world, there are people who disagree with this, but I just don't see how you can argue against this. But it's a sinful world run by sinful people who should still strive for virtue, but judge all of their policies according to reality and then ask 3 questions. So if people disagree with that fundamentally, and there are some now who don't believe there's any sin, they only believe in sinful structures, they would disagree with everything I'm going to say, but their policies are the ones that lead to totalitarianism. Here's the 3 questions I think you should ask. Ready? 1. What I'm voting for, what am I comparing it to? And there should be something in the real world that you compare it to, because in a sinful world, no matter what you vote for, you're going to vote for one thing to be solved, and there's going to be other problems that are created by that, because we're sinners. We cannot solve the big questions just by our deeds, our money, and our technology. So which vote has the least trade-offs or the best trade-offs or the least overall harm? Sometimes it might be the lesser of 2 evils, because there really is no good solution, but there's never going to be a perfect one. So compared to what? And that's why even when we believe in the free market, people say, well, that's not Christian. I go, I never said it was. But the free market means that if I buy something and you're selling something, we don't make that transaction until you agree for the price that you want, which may be lower than you want to get, and I agree to pay the price that I want, which may be a little higher, but we both shake hands. That process is fraught with less shenanigans. I hate to keep using that word, but I do. Whereas if one guy determines what that guy's going to sell and what this guy's going to pay, one guy does it for everybody, oh my gosh, and the last thing he's going to do is do what's best for you, because he doesn't have time to do what's best for you. He's going to do what's best for himself. Give somebody money and have them go buy you a car. They're always going to come back with a car that's got less of what you wanted and they paid more for it, because they're not going to sit there and keep walking out to get the best deal. They're just not going to do that as much as you would do for yourself. So that's why. So, compared to what? Compared to what? And use your sanctified common sense to assess. Then how much does it cost? There's always a cost benefit there. When it comes to government, they're going to do something for this, but it's also going to take away from that. That's the COVID-19 thing. They shut the whole country down, and then you ask, and what did it do to the country? And was that the right response? And if you use the term to save one life, that you will destroy the wherewithal for 350 million people. And if we are doing things that are scientifically verified, and we're doing the distancing, and we're doing all those kind of things, why can't we get back to work, as the Barrington document said, where you protect the vulnerable, but you don't let fear grip the whole society? So how much does it cost, and who pays? And we should all be part of the paying process so we can assess whether it was worth the price. And finally, what's your data? Show me that what you just said succeeded or failed. And this is where government never seems to have to produce. But again, so those three questions are huge. And then the final one is First Amendment freedom of religion. It protects us from when the government oversteps its bounds, and we should always keep that in our minds when we're voting. So I hope that those are helpful ideas, because we're now being kind of pressured into, this is what you're going to think, this is what you're not going to think. And Christians need to be people who understand the limited use of government, the limited benefit of government, and the maximum benefit of free people who are living religiously motivated lives for the sake of their neighbor. And being able to explain why this stuff is so powerful and so good for everybody. So thanks again for the thoughts and the emails. And again, when we get involved in these kind of things, we have a two-kingdom perspective. We know God is at work, and we know that. But he tells us to be useful in his hands in his preserving work, and useful in his hands and in proclaiming his saving work. So till next time, speak the truth in love with humility and grace. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Until next time, God richly bless you. It's great to have been with you today. Take care.